Welcome to the Bay Area Science Festival Bee Colorful activity. Today I want to teach you a bit about some bees that you might not know about. My name is Nina Sokolov, and I'm a PhD student at UC Berkeley. That means it's my job to answer a question that no one's ever answered before. I've always liked insects, and for my PhD I decided to study bees. They are really important for pollinating both flowers in nature and the food that we like to eat. For my job, I get to work in a lot of cool places, ranging from the almond orchards in the Central Valley, to cattle ranches in Marin, to the mountains in the Sierras. And at each of these places, I can find all different types of bees. Now, most of us know what a honeybee looks like. It's not too big, and it's this classic yellow color, and they live together in a group called a colony. I'm sure all of you have tasted their delicious honey, which they make in order to have extra food when there aren't as many flowers out. They are also one of the main pollinators humans use to make the food that we eat. There are so many more bee species than just the honeybee here. In fact, the honeybee is not even native to the US. It was brought over from Europe hundreds of years ago. You'll probably recognize the bumblebee too. There are many species of bumblebees, and like the honeybee, they are social and live in groups, but their colonies are much smaller. Bumblebees are important for pollinating our crops too. They can even pollinate things that honeybees can't. That's because they can do this thing called buzz pollination. That means when they go into a flower, they buzz, and then the pollen drops down onto them. If they don't buzz, then they get no pollen. Now, both of these kinds of bees live in colonies. But did you know that about 90% of all bee species are solitary? That means they have no hive or colony. The females are their own queens and live by themselves. They build their own nests and collect their own pollen and nectar for their babies. Most of these solitary bees make their nests by digging underground in the dirt, but other bees make their nests from biting holes into wood and stems. The females build their nests and then go out looking for flowers. Then they bring back home some nectar and pollen and mush it into this thing called bee bread before laying a single egg on top of that food. Then they plug that hole up with leaves or mud to protect the baby while it grows up, and then they do it all again. Now that I've told you the difference between social bees and solitary bees, let us look at some of these bees that you might not have known about. Here is a carpenter bee, the largest bee in North America. The females of the species are large and black, and they like to make their homes in wood, while their males are this bright orange color. This sweat bee is a beautiful, bright, metallic green. They are called sweat bees because some of them like to lick up your sweat. But not all sweat bees are metallic like this. This sweat bee species is small and black and might look like a wasp to you, while other sweat bees even have rainbow colors on their body, like this nomia bee. So, why did I decide to make a coloring book exercise? Well, part of my job is knowing what different species look like, and drawing helps me better be able to see the details on different types of bees. When I draw a bee, it helps me memorize what they look like. People have used art and science for a very long time to record their observations and to describe new species. Today, you can choose to color the following California bees. Bombus vosnesenskyii. This is the Yellowface Bumblebee. They are mostly black and have yellow shoulders and a yellow face. They are used to pollinate tomatoes because honeybees can't pollinate them. If you've seen a bumblebee in the Bay Area, it might have been this species. Next is Anthidium Maculosum, the wool carder bee. These females will collect their pollen on their bellies rather than their legs like the honeybee and bumblebees do. And the males of this species are known as one of the angriest bees. They will defend their favorite flowers and even chase off other bees and insects if they get too close. Lastly is Xeromelecta Californica, which is a species of cuckoo bee. It almost looks like a wasp, and it doesn't have very many hairs unlike the other bees. It's not very fuzzy. That's because these bees are parasites. That means that rather than taking care of their own babies, they will lay their eggs inside the nests of other species and trick them into gathering food for their babies instead. Now you can pick any of these bees to color in if you have a printer at home. But if you don't have a printer, no need to worry. I don't have a printer at home either, actually. Instead, you could do what I did when I made these coloring pages. You can look at the photos of the bees in the document that's provided and draw what you see from the picture. Don't worry if it doesn't look like my pictures yet. It takes a lot of practice. I would love to see what you all have drawn, so please share it with me. We are going to be doing a contest on Instagram where the winner will get their very own poster and their coloring or drawing featured on the Bay Area Science Festival website. We will be looking for the most colorful and the most like colorings. If you're interested, post your finished coloring on Instagram and use the hashtag #BeColorful to enter. If you don't have an Instagram, then go ahead and send a picture to our email address at ucbclear@gmail.com. Submit the drawings by the end of the day tomorrow for a chance to win. So, grab your pencils, markers, crayons, or paints, and join me in drawing some bees. If you've thought of any questions about bees while watching this video, please stick around and ask our panel of bee biologists. Thank you. Okay, did everyone hear that, or was I just sitting here in silence for 6 minutes? All good, yay. So my name's Nina. As the video said, I'm a PhD student at Berkeley, and I'll be the one doing a live drawing of a bee. And I have 2 bee biologists with me today to help answer your questions. So if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
I can go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Bethann Bruninga-Sokolar, and I am a scientist at the University of Minnesota, where I study the diversity of our native bee species, and in particular, how can we create new habitat to support that diversity and conserve bee species going into the future.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Mola. I'm a research ecologist at the U.S. Geological Survey, which, despite being a geological organization, also occasionally hires biologists. I did my PhD at the University of California, Davis, and I am a bumblebee expert.
Thanks, both of you. So we are going to be answering questions via the Q&A box. So if you have any questions from that video, anything about bees that you've always wondered about, or just overall questions that might have been inspired from the video or from before, Bethann and John will be looking through those and answering them, and then I will be doing a drawing of this Melisodes bee. So they're called longhorn bees. As you can see, they have these long antennae, and I think that they're very adorable. And sometimes they like to sleep on twigs like this guy. And I also thought that it'd be a little more entertaining to watch me just color this rather than to draw it all from the start, but I can show you what this looks like when I'm working on it. I'm using Procreate to make this drawing on my iPad. I took a photo from the internet of this bee sleeping on a twig. And the first thing that I like to do is I like to sketch it all out, just these big boxy shapes that you can see here to get where the different pieces would be. Then I take another layer on top of that one. It's a little dark here, but I take another layer on top and I get the details. And then I take another additional final layer over that one where I figure out where I want all the lines to go. And then the last part that you all will see me doing is adding in the coloring underneath the line work. And if we don't have any questions yet, then we can also do the polls too.
We are pretty active in the Q&A right now, actually, although we are getting some questions related to the first poll question.
Oh, great. You guys can start reading any of those out loud that you want to answer.
Well, I'm in the process of typing an answer to one that's very related to my work. So,
Nice.
Kawika, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Feel free to correct me in the chat. Asked, what are great plants to grow in your yard for welcoming bees? This person lives in Ventura, California. So that's a very long, complicated answer and an active area of research. So I'm going to type the names of a couple of online resources that can help point you to some lists of plant species that would be great to look up.
Awesome.
I guess in general, I could just talk about some general rules of thumb that are pretty easy to follow. One of the big rules of thumb is whatever plants you do plant, it's best if you can have flowers for as many months as possible out of the year, especially in California, where the weather tends to be nicer than it is here in Minnesota. But providing flowers for the entire time period of the year that bees are active and need those food resources is really important, and perhaps the key thing when we're talking about creating pollinator habitat.
Yeah, I find in California, especially in late, like kind of August, September, when it's really dry and a lot of flowers have even dried up. I know that that's a somewhat hard time for the bees to find the food that they need. So planting flowers that will specifically be blooming around that time is really helpful.
I was just going to answer, and I believe I've clicked the button correctly, but I was going to answer live, how can we distinguish wasps from bees? One of the simplest ways is basically the fuzziness of the insect. So bees tend to be fuzzier because they have forked hairs that help them collect pollen on their bodies. Additionally, bees are essentially vegetarian wasps. So if you see an organism eating pollen, but it looks like a bee or a wasp, it's probably a bee.
Sometimes I definitely see wasps on flowers too, though. They can also be important pollinators. They look a little meaner in the face a lot of the times. Like bees always have a sweet looking little face.
We have a question. Someone asked if bees like all flowers. So not all bees like all flowers. Bees definitely have preferences. A bee species can have a preference. So, you know, we see bumblebees like specific types of flowers and other bees like other types of flowers. So in general, flower diversity, the more types of flowers, the more species of plants that you have at one time in one place, the more, the greater numbers of bee species you're going to see. And this is a question for me. Someone asked, what do bees do in the winter in Minnesota? That's a great question because it gets very, very cold. So as Nina mentioned in the video, we have some bees that live in colonies. So the honeybee is a little bit unique because honeybees can survive over the winter. They'll survive in their hive, and that's why they produce honey, is to have a food source for over the winter to survive. But most of our native solitary bee species and our bumblebees, the bees will overwinter as larvae or pupae, so they won't be what you think of as an adult bee. They'll be underground or in a stem in an immature life stage, sort of a baby bee. And then in the spring, they'll finish their development and emerge as an adult.
We can also do one of the poll questions whenever you guys feel up for it.
Yeah, well, we have a few questions actually related to our first poll question. So
nice, we should just do that.
Yeah, so it looks like I can just click this launch polling button, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, so everyone, we have an active poll question about whether all bees sting.
Yeah, it's funny when I actually started working on bees for my PhD officially for the first time. I'd never been stung by a bee, so I didn't know if I was actually allergic to it or not. Turns out I kind of am.
Oh no.
It's weird. It's fine for 4 or 5 days, and then I get hives in that spot. So my immune system's very delayed in its response to it. So it could be worse. Looks like most people have voted. Do you want to end the polling and show the results?
Sure. It looks like there we have everybody. All right, end polling.
Nice. So most people think, well, I can share the results. Most people say no, but we do have a portion of people that say yes. So let me share my little screen. So here's some of the poll answers. For the first one, the answer is no, not all bees sting. That's because only female bees sting. All of the males, none of them will ever sting you. That's why in this photo on the left, this orange bee, that carpenter bee that I showed in the video, that's why you can actually hold male bees, is that they won't sting you at all. And here we see a male honeybee. They kind of look strange and have these big bug eyes. So only females will sting. I'm going to go back to little drawing, and then you guys can both keep going with the Q&A. And we'll keep peppering in little poll questions throughout.
I was hoping to take a moment to answer a question. How do bees pollinate the nectar? So flowers produce nectar in order to attract bees to the flower. And basically it is a reward that flowers provide to bees in exchange for visiting the flower.
Yeah, I didn't explain pollination at all during the video, so don't feel worried if you don't understand that. If there's more questions about pollination, we can definitely go into that.
Someone asked what's the biggest bee in the world, and so I'm answering that question in the Q&A and sharing a link to a National Geographic story about it. The bee is called Wallace's giant bee. The scientific name is Megachile pluto, and it is a huge bee in Indonesia. And it's a fun story because I believe scientists thought it was extinct for quite some time. And it's just been in the past couple of years that a couple of scientists went over to search for it and were able to find that species. And it's cool if you follow the link to the National Geographic article. Again, that's in the Q&A under the answered questions category. You should be able to find it. I can also put it in the chat as well. You'll be able to see pictures of that bee. I've just put that link in the chat as well.
Yeah, that was a pretty recent discovery again.
And
that was really cool.
Our newest question, someone asked, can bees bite you? So they do have, well, as you can see in Nina's drawing, Nina, maybe you could point out the mandible on that bee.
Yeah.
The mandible is the mouth parts of the bee. So Nina just circled it for us. And bees use those mandibles, as this bee in the drawing is doing, to hold on to a stem in this case. Some use it aggressively against other bees. In particular, some males can be quite competitive and use their mandibles as weapons against each other. But for the most part, bees are small. And so even if you have one on you, it actually can't bite you. Its mandibles, its mouth is too small. One exception, I have heard some people say that they've been bitten by male carpenter bees or male bumblebees because as we mentioned, the male bees can't sting, but if you still catch one in your hand, they'll still try to get away. And so the carpenter bees and bumblebees are large enough that their mandibles can give you a little pinch. It doesn't really hurt. I mean, it's just a little pinch.
I'll take a crack at answering the next question. 5-year-old Sam of San Francisco would like to hear more about burrowing bees and what their burrows are like. A lot of bees, most bees, burrow underground, and they make small tunnels where the mother provisions a little bit of food for her babies. And they're not very large burrows, they're the width of a bee. And I will, in the chat, in response to that question, provide a link to a picture or a drawing of a squash bee's burrow. And squash bees are pretty cool, especially in October, because they pollinate a lot of the winter squash that we eat and pumpkins.
Yeah, I also have a poll question about what bees will like to put in their nests if we want to do that at some point, because I have some pictures of that as well.
There's another question about whether wasps and bees are enemies. I would say that sometimes wasps and bees can in fact be enemies. There are many species of wasp that have really long, the technical term is ovipositor, but it's basically a very long spike that they have on them that they use to implant their little wasp eggs into the developing baby bees. So those developing wasps then eat their way out of the developing bee. And it's definitely a situation of enemies between wasps and bees sometimes.
Yeah, those are parasitic wasps, and they don't just do that to bees, they do that to everything. It's definitely a wasp move. They like to do it to caterpillars, beetles, bees, spiders.
Yeah, and it may at times sound like the thing of nightmares or a bit scary, but it's actually a very important thing in order to have strong and healthy crops in agriculture. Those wasps do that to lots of pests and things that would otherwise consume our food.
Yeah, and some people have been using it as instead of using, or I guess additionally to using pesticides, to be breeding these kinds of wasps and bringing them in to specifically take care of those pests.
We have a question about a lot of black bees that make holes in a wood roof outside. This person thought they were carpenter bees, but then you showed a photo, Nina, that I think looked different from maybe their bees. So there's more than one species of carpenter bee, and depending on where you live, you quite possibly have a different species than in that photo. The carpenter bee species that's very common along much of the East Coast, for example, has quite a bit of yellow on it, as well as it's a large black bee with some yellow on it. But if you didn't recognize Nina's photo as your type of bee, what you're describing sounds like a carpenter bee. They do explicitly kind of drill those holes in the wood, and they do like to target wood roofs and porches. So it would not surprise me if that's what you have, just a different species than Nina showed.
There's a question from Julia. I heard bees are colorblind. How do they choose what flowers to target? Bees are not colorblind, but they do have different colors that they see than us. So bees' color or vision is shifted towards the blues. They have a hard time seeing red or hotter colors like red. And when they see flowers, they see different patterns on the flowers than we might see with our vision. So it's not so much that they're colorblind, so much that they have different visual cues or a different type of vision than we might have. And I will look up some pictures of what flowers look like to bees and post them in the chat. It's really cool.
Also, bees, their vision is a little different than ours. We can see by, standing still, and we can still see the things, but bees, they kind of have to move back and forth in order to be able to have a complete picture of what's in front of them. So it's just this kind of very, very different kind of way of seeing. And if you see in my little photo, all these different little black spots on their eyes, those are called pseudopupils. So it's these kinds of weird spots on their eyes, and they're pretty much looking, this bee is like looking a lot over here. But you can tell if a bee is alive in a photo if it still has those spots in its eyes. Most bees have them.
We have a couple questions about whether bees or all bees die when they sting. So the bees that die when they sting are the honeybees, and that's because their stinger has a barb on it. And so when they stick their stinger in you, that barb gets stuck, and it actually rips out of the bee, and that does kill the bee. And that's why with a honeybee sting, you might have heard that you should, use your fingernail or use a credit card to kind of scrape the stinger out, because you have to dislodge that barb. But all the rest of the bees that we have in North America are bumblebees and the solitary bees. They don't have that barb, and so when they sting you, they don't die.
To answer another question about how bees see, this question is, how do bees see people? And I can't say that I know of anything from published scientific work as to how bees see people. So this is a very interesting question. But to us, we would look so comically large that I imagine bees wouldn't perceive us as anything different than like a large moving tree or just a massive moving lump. Probably wouldn't see us as anything particularly defined.
When I'm out catching bees, I always try to make sure to not have my shadow go in front of them, because they get a little scared by that. So probably, they're just making sure that they're not going to get eaten by a bird or something. But when we cast this big, looming shadow, they can probably get a little nervous by us. At least a lot of the solitary bees, they like to fly away quickly if I cast my shadow over them.
Someone asked, what happens if a person kills a queen bee? Will the bees attack the person? So I assume this person is thinking about honeybees. The queen honeybee generally stays in the hive for most of her lifetime, so it's pretty unlikely that you would be able to get to the queen. But honeybees do communicate via pheromones, so via chemicals that can move through the air. And so to some extent, if you're near a hive or near a large collection of related honeybees and you kill one, that bee, as it's dying, can release an alarm signal that might alert other bees. I think you're very unlikely, if you're just in a field of wildflowers, to end up with a swarm of bees attacking you. But if you're close to a hive, I have been chased away from a honeybee hive, for example, by bees that alert their sisters that something large and potentially threatening is nearby.
I'll take a moment to answer, how do bees pollinate? So pollination is a very complex topic. There's a bunch of different ways that bees pollinate flowers, but largely bees are unaware that they're pollinating flowers. It's rather actually something that they're tricked into. So bees, when they visit flowers, they're trying to get as much pollen and nectar from the flower as possible. And the flower is trying to trick the bees into moving around as much pollen as possible. So some bees, when they get to a flower, they'll shake the flower to try and remove pollen from it. Some will simply just gather it from the flower directly using their legs. And some will actually bring the pollen into their mouths and hold it there in a liquid. So as many ways as you could imagine that bees could collect pollen, there are that many bees that do it that way.
Here's an interesting question. Do bees eat anything other than pollen and honey? So for the most part, no. They get their protein from pollen and their carbohydrates from nectar, actually. And then we have the honeybees and some related bees that will use nectar to make honey, which is essentially just concentrated flower nectar. But there are some bees that will collect other things that are made by plants. So for example, tree resins. We think that honeybees in particular use those as part of their defense against diseases. They'll actually line parts of their hives with tree resin. So think about like tree sap, like from a pine tree. I'm not sure exactly which tree species they collect, but they will use some of those other plant products for other things. We also have some solitary bees that will use flower petals and bits of leaves to create linings for their nests. So again, not really eating them, but they are using other types of materials than just pollen and nectar.
We can also do another poll question of any of the ones that haven't been touched on thus far.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Do you want me to launch one, Nina?
Yeah, whichever one you think.
Great. Okay, we've possibly already answered this, but some people might have missed it. So I'm launching the second question, which is, do bees that sting you always get their stinger ripped out? Someone asked, how do bees collect pollen and why do they buzz? Maybe I'll answer this quickly while we're doing the poll. So bees collect pollen in a variety of different ways, but the most common is that they'll actually use their legs and their mouth parts to actually kind of comb it or gather it, just like we might do with our hands off of a plant. And the buzz pollination is that some plants actually hold their pollen very tightly in an organ called the anther, which is a small part in the middle of flowers. And that anther actually requires some mechanical stimulation in order to release the pollen. And so for those plant species that require that, our native bee species can buzz the required way to get that anther out, and then to get that pollen out of the anther, excuse me. And then they'll use their front legs and their mouth parts, as I mentioned, to actually remove the pollen from the flower. And then they carry it in different ways on their bodies. So Nina showed some images in the video about bees that carry pollen on their bellies versus on their legs. And a few bees will even carry it internally, and then they'll regurgitate it when they get back to their nest. So a lot of variety there.
So I can end the polling and show the results. Looks like quite a few people said no, but also a few people showed yes. So let me stop sharing those results, and then I'll share the answers. So do bees that sting you always get their stingers ripped out? No, So the honeybees, that's the ones that we think about, they get their stingers ripped out, and that's because they really, really want to protect the queen and their hive in general. And so when their stingers get ripped out, they're still, pumping that venom into you. And so that's why you want to try to get the stinger out as fast as you can. And as you can see in the image to the right, this shows all the little tiny barbs that are on the stinger. And so that's what gets stuck in you and why it gets ripped out of the bee. But it's only honeybees that do this. Honeybees have their big colony, their queen that they have to protect, and so they really, really want to protect her. But a lot of the other bees, they just don't want to get into as big of a fight usually. And so they don't have these barbs on their stingers, and if they do sting you, they can sting you multiple times, but it doesn't, in my experience. I've never been stung by a bumblebee actually, so I don't know if it's any more painful. John, I don't know if you have, probably, but is it more or less painful than a honeybee?
Well, there's a lot of questions about being stung and pain and morbid versions of that question as well in the chat. So I will say that I've caught probably over 10,000 bumblebees in my career, and I've been stung by bumblebees twice. Once was while putting gluing a tag onto the back of a bumblebee, and she woke up a little faster than I expected, and it didn't hurt very much. And the other time was while I was working with a colony of bumblebees. Bumblebees are pretty non-aggressive, and their stings, I would say, when it does happen, hurt a little less than honeybees.
Yeah, and then things like sweat bees too. I've been stung by them because they like to lick up your sweat, like I said, and so they hang out on the back of your knees. And so sometimes when you go to sit down or something, and they're like stuck in your knee, they'll sting you because they get squished. But those really don't hurt at all. It's just kind of surprising, and you don't expect something to be there. But yeah, they mostly just do it because they're accidentally getting squished by you.
There's a question that's been up for a while. How do bees know which flower has already been pollinated? This is a really interesting question. There's a variety of ways that bees know that a flower has already been visited or has been recently visited. One of the ways is by scent. So bees can smell other bees having previously been to the flower. Another really interesting way is through electricity. So sometimes flowers can build up like a static charge, similar to when you might wear socks on a carpet and then touch like a doorknob. So bees can sense that electric field around the flower. And then another way is by when they get to the flower, if all the pollen or nectar has already been removed from the flower, they know that it's been visited and they can move on to the next flower. And because there's been a few questions about pollination, to extend that answer, that's also the reason that flowers don't make unlimited amounts of pollen and nectar. If a bee could get all of the pollen and nectar it needed from just a single flower, it would only visit one flower, and then that flower wouldn't be able to get its pollen moved to a nearby flower. And that's how flowers make more flowers, is by moving that pollen around.
Also, if you like to watch bees on flowers, like some of us do, you can see these bees. They'll like go to flower, they'll kind of be on it for a second, then they'll keep moving. So it's I think, yeah, some part sensing, some part trial and error. They'll go and they'll look and be like, no, and they'll keep going. So if you watch them long enough, you'll see them making those decisions.
Someone asked, what do bees look like on the inside? Which I think is an interesting question because it's so different from what we look like on the inside. So bees, like insects in general, have their skeleton on the outside, unlike us. So that hard outer shell to their body is their skeleton. And so inside, it's just sacks of goo. It's all of their organs and the fluid that their organs are bathed in. And of course, they do have some kind of internal structures and supports, but for the most part, they're just squishy.
These have been some great questions. I'm really enjoying them.
Yeah, this is really fun. Nicole W asks, how do you know if it is male or female? I'll let the others chime in on other types of bees, but in bumblebees, you can often tell if an individual is male or female because the males have longer bodies because they have additional segments to their bodies. They have longer antennae, so it kind of looks like their antennae are comically long. And sometimes they'll have little mustaches of extra hair on their faces. And as Nina had pointed out in that poll question earlier, they're unable to sting. So it's pretty fun when you can recognize a male bee as a trick, catch it with your hands and hold it. But do not attempt that until you are absolutely certain which sex of bee you are dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the rule of thumb is you see on the antenna how they have all these little segments. Boy bees will have 13 total segments and girl bees will have 12. Is that the right number? I think so. But that's hard to, gauge without a microscope. So there's all those other little tricks too. Being able to guess if it's a boy or a girl.
Yeah, and sometimes like that Carpenter bee that Nina showed earlier, the males and the females will look dramatically different. So the females of the common California Carpenter bee are a really beautiful black color, and the males are also a beautiful golden color.
We've got a question about what drew each of us to studying bees. Does either of you want to summarize quickly why you do what you do?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah. Oh, and I also wanted to add Shrisa, whose name I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, added in the chat a very important point about female bees. They will be carrying pollen, whereas you'll never see male bees carrying pollen. And that's a really easy and interesting way to tell if you're looking at a male or female bee. I got into studying bees because I grew up, my dad mowed lawns for a living, so I was always really interested in plants. And many plants require bees for pollination. So when I went to college, I signed up as a biology major and kept that interest in plants, and that sort of led one thing to the other until I find myself thinking about bees every day of my life.
Yeah, and for me, I have just started studying bees sort of recently. I was kind of one of those kids that liked all the animals, and I really started to like insects in college when I realized just how diverse they were, how many species there were, and I also always wanted to discover a new species, and I thought that my best luck at that would be with a bug. And then with bees, I started studying them during my PhD. to say that I like to study disease ecology. So I like to study the viruses that make bees sick. And I really wanted to study something with disease and insects, and I wanted to study that without the idea of using that knowledge to kill the insect necessarily. You know, a lot of times we think about how to kill pests that are, you know, eating our crops, or how to kill mosquitoes or something. And I was like, no, I really like the bugs though. So I want to keep them alive. And so one type of bug that we really want to keep alive is definitely the bees. And so that's kind of how I got here.
We did get someone requesting another poll. Do we want to do another poll in the final minutes here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have we done the how many species are there one?
No, let's do that.
Do you know which number that is, Nina?
7, but I can launch the polling now. So the question is, how many types of bees are there in the world? All over the world. Looking like a bunch of answers are coming through. People are doing a great job. I think that the answer to this is kind of in my activity description, so maybe I'm slightly, if you read it, then you know the answer. I had other poll questions too, with some nice photos, so I'll go through those in the meantime since we're going into our final minutes, so you can see those pictures too. Okay, do another 10 seconds, make sure you voted if you want to vote. Okay, and polling. So most people got the right answer of 20,000 species of bees in the world. Yeah, I feel like with people, that's what I'm saying, there's just so many different types of insects in the world, including bees. And of those 20,000, 1,600 are found in California. So we have a lot of bee diversity here, which is what also made me want to study them too. Is my poll answer being shared right now? Is that my screen?
I think I just clicked share poll results, so hopefully.
Yeah, but
yours. Sorry, yours.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that we've touched on before, and so I wanted to make sure to show photos of this, is what do bees like to put in their nests. Some like to put flower petals in their nests like this one. Some like to put leaves in their nests. Others like to put mud in their nest, but there's a certain group of bees called cellophane bees, and they even they make their own kind of plastic material that they line their nests with. So even they put plastic inside their nests. But this is the answer to how many bees are there in the world, and it's over 20,000. So and like I said earlier, most of those are solitary bees, around 90%. The other 10% are the social ones, like the bumblebees and the honeybees that we normally think of. And I don't think we have time to do the poll question, but one of the things that's really cool is that we've talked about how bees are vegetarian wasps. There's also some wasps that like to eat pollen. However, there's also some bees that like to eat meat, including these vulture bees. So it's like nature likes to break the rules. We like to try to put these definitions on them, and then nature says, no, there's these meat-eating bees as well. Okay. So for the last few minutes, I'm going to put my final touches on the drawing, the coloring that I have. Hopefully it's been fun to watch me do this, even though I'm not an artist by training. So I'm slightly nervous, so I can not mind. Maybe I'll fix it before posting it online. But if you guys have been coloring along with me, I would love to see that. So if you want to post a photo of your coloring or your drawing on Instagram with the hashtag #BeColorful, like that's it over here mirrored. Or if you don't have Instagram, then you can email it to us at ucbclear@gmail.com. I'd love to see if you've drawn any kind of bee or colored in any of my coloring book pages. I would love to see that. And then we'll be looking through those submissions and making either one poster featuring a drawing with some of my drawings, or if there's lots of entries and we can't decide which one's the best, we'll put a lot of them on one poster and post that poster on Instagram, on the Science Festival website, and if you're interested, we can send you a poster of it as well.
Are we still rapid fire answering some questions?
Yeah, we still have a few minutes. So,
all right. Just being asked, does anyone eat bees? Lots of animals will consume bee brood or the developing larvae of bees. It's a very rich source of nutrition. Sometimes humans will even consume that. CJ said that they read an article about the bees' waggle dance. This is something that honeybees do to communicate the locations of food to other colony members. This is in fact true. And there's lots of research into this because people can even use waggle dances to try and track down pollutants or get information about the environment from it. One thing that I study is in other bees that don't have the waggle dance, we can use genetics, or we can do goofy things like glue tags onto the back of bees in order to track them. And one last rapid one, Josephine asks, can bees be non-binary? Bees do not have gender, but bees can be intersex and have occasionally male and female organs. And actually sometimes it happens where they split right down the middle and half of them have male expressive traits and half of their body is female expressive traits. It's really cool looking.
Bethan, do you have any final question that you could answer quickly?
I was just running through some of these questions. I don't think any of us have eaten a bee. Is that true?
I've eaten some of their bee bread, like the Carpenter Bees. They have, like I said, the pollen and nectar mushed up into a ball that they lay their egg on. I've eaten a little bit of that. It's really good.
I can't off the top of my head think of any cultures where people eat bees, but there are so many cultures where people eat insects of many kinds because insects are a good protein source, like any other animal, that it wouldn't surprise me if somewhere there's a culture that eats bees.
Okay. Feel like I don't want to be going into the time of the next people too much, but thank you so much for all your amazing questions. This is a lot of fun. I hope that watching me color this is kind of fun. I'll be posting this. Like I said, please share any of the drawings that you've done. If you have any additional questions about bees that pop in, you can also use that email address to ask some questions related to bees and share your pictures and everything. But I hope that you guys have, I hope that you all have a fun rest of your day. Hope that you go to some other Bay Area Science Festival events. And thank you to Bethan and John for helping me answer these questions, and to the Bay Area Science Festival moderators and tech support for helping us do this event.
Thanks, y'all. It's fun answering questions.
Yes, thanks everyone.